Welcome back, everyone. Jake here. In today's video, we have an interesting report from the Klaxon, and it's titled, China Running Military Drills on the Russian Border. This article's from May 31st, and I've actually never heard of the Klaxon before, but apparently it's an investigative Australian newspaper that specializes in exposing business malfeasance, government corruption, and national security. The author of this article is Anthony Clan. I checked him out on Twitter. He seems pretty legit. So I'm choosing to believe the sources that led to this report, even though there aren't any American mainstream media sources also saying this occurred. But this is what it says. The Chinese government has been running war drills on its far northeastern border, raising expert concerns that the superpower could be considering a push into Russian territory with Moscow focused on its invasion of Ukraine. The Klaxon has obtained images and details of China's Air Force and Army conducting secretive exercises in the Russian border areas along the Ussuri River. This is near Russia's sparsely populated Khabarovsk and Ussuriysk regions, and they've been conducting these exercises since February. They've involved Chinese Air Force fighter jets and bombers running drills, including live fire exercises out of its northeastern Harbin Air Base. So where is this on the map? Here is East Asia, and we have a very long border between China and Russia. This is the Ussuri River, and this is the Chinese Air Force base in Harbin, where they've been conducting these exercises. And there's only one adversary potentially in the region where conducting live fire exercises makes any sense. Beijing secretly began its Air Force and armored unit drills in February near Russian borders in the name of routine exercises. This is according to one senior intelligence source. China shares its entire northeastern border with Russia, yet it still feels the need to conduct such drills, specifically where its fighter jets and bombers practice taking out ground targets, which can only be in Russian territory. So this is pretty interesting because the narrative coming out of Moscow, the narrative coming out of Beijing publicly, is that these two countries are allies, and they've been conducting joint military drills since 2003. 2003 is not a coincidence. That's when the United States invaded Iraq, and the Bush doctrine of spreading democracy around the world. Obviously, countries that aren't as democratic, like Russia and China, would object to this and then form their own strategic alliance out of self-interest to counter the United States, counter NATO. And even up until February, China and Russia were saying that they were best friends, unbreakable partners. Putin, given his health concerns, given the pandemic, still chose to make an in-person appearance in Beijing before China hosted the Olympics. And they stated that their partnership had no limits, and that China and Russia were closer than ever. However, I think that the reason why Putin went to Beijing is to notify Xi Jinping in person, hey, I'm finally doing this. I'm going to invade Ukraine. It'll take maybe 6 or 7 days. We'll knock them out pretty easily. Everything will go great. That didn't turn out the way Vladimir Putin wanted, and it was obvious 3 weeks into the war that Russia was struggling. Russia was experiencing heavy losses. And according to US intelligence, Russia was asking China for military equipment, military parts, military assistance. And China didn't want anything to do with that. The United States and Western allies made it clear to China that if you overtly participate, you're actually giving military equipment, military training, military intelligence to the Russians, then we will impose economic sanctions on you if you truly are their military ally. And Beijing immediately said, we don't want anything to do with that. Publicly, this was March 15th. China said they wanted to steer clear of U.S. sanctions. They're not condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but they're also not supporting it actively. So Russia didn't plan on this. They thought that potentially China would have their back if this maybe became a protracted conflict, which Russia was not prepared for. And this article is from May, but the United States has been publicly saying to China, thank you. Thank you for not providing military assistance to Russia in this conflict and just basically staying neutral. Beijing has also ordered stress tests to assess how damaging to the Chinese economy would it be if they got Western-style sanctions comparable to what's been put on Russia. And Russia, to their own credit, they're energy independent, and they do have enough domestic agencies where they probably can limp along for a good while. China, on the other hand, is an economic powerhouse that relies on exports. Exports to the United States, exports to Europe. So if sanctions were to be put on China, it would devastate the Chinese economy much more even than what Russia is experiencing right now. So coming back to this article and potentially what is happening here. Is China out of nowhere going to attack Russia? Absolutely not. Russia has nuclear weapons. That would be a poorly planned out attack. However, these two countries have history. This is the Chinese Empire as of 1820. This is only 200 years ago. So the Qing dynasty, expanded from the Central Asian plain all the way to the Pacific coast in outer Manchuria. China was in control of this coastline, this territory, the city of what was before Vladivostok. And this was only 200 years ago. Remember, Russia currently is making historical claims about their empire in justification for invading Ukraine. However, China then experienced their century of humiliation in which Western powers like France, Germany, Great Britain, and even Japan took a lot of Chinese territory. And you'll notice on the map, this dotted red line is the historical border for the Qing Empire. Russia was coming down from the north. Russia seized this coastline from Imperial China. And after World War II, China was able to kick out all of the Western powers. They unified the states. They reclaimed all of their territory that they lost under the century of humiliation, except for outer Manchuria. Russia, which became the Soviet Union, they didn't know how to get this territory back from them, and the Soviet Union at the time wasn't willing to accommodate them with their own historical borders. So I'm sure Chinese citizens for 100 years now have been looking at this territory, looking at this coastline, and why? Why isn't Russia respecting Chinese sovereignty and returning historical land that had been part of China for thousands of years? Additionally, I also find it fascinating when you zoom in on this territory. We can go into Google Maps, and every square inch of this land on the Chinese side of the border is being cultivated, is being used for economic productivity. Potentially tens of millions of people live in this area. You then cross the border to the Russian side, and it's just empty woods, empty forests. Russia isn't even using it. This is the exact same, climate and topography and soil. Yet China has found a way to make their side of the border productive, while Russia basically ignores this part of their empire. All they care about is the port city of Vladivostok for trading purposes and for their military. But I'm sure China would love to just slice this off, get access to the Pacific coastline. China unlike the United States, unlike Russia, is not energy independent. They have to import a huge percentage of their energy needs. So, this is what I'm arguing for you in this video, is that if a serious conflict breaks out and escalates, it's in China's best interest to seize some of this coastline. I'm sure there are oil and gas deposits that Russia hasn't gotten around to tapping yet. Or potentially, China could even slice here and try and take outer Manchuria as well as Kamchatka and try and get access to the Arctic Circle. There's lots of oil and gas reserves that are known up here, and if China could extend its border to the Arctic, strategically, economically, that would be very beneficial to them. So here is what is likely to happen. If NATO and Russia go to war, that's not a very likely scenario, but what I'm arguing is that if NATO and Russia do go to war, if it's a conventional war, Russia's going to get destroyed. Why would China come to Russia's defense when it's obvious Russia is going to get obliterated? If it turns into a nuclear war between NATO and Russia, it's kind of global winter for the Northern Hemisphere for a couple decades. Everybody loses in that scenario. China didn't really hurt anything by planning. But the most likely outcome of this invasion of Ukraine, if Vladimir Putin doesn't withdraw, doesn't give up, doesn't try to economically recover, is that Russia could fall into disarray. The central government in Moscow could collapse. They could lose control over the rural provinces. And in this scenario, from history, when empires collapse in such a way, they turn into basically little fiefdoms in basically a civil war. Warlords regionally, probably members of the military, will take control of nuclear stockpiles in their area and then say, we are now the Union of Central Siberia. This is our sovereign territory. We're declaring our own independence. So if the central government in Moscow collapses and the horde lands all want to secede from the Russian Federation, this is the perfect opportunity for China to pick sides. I think this is what they're actually wargaming and preparing for. They're not going to attack Russia if Russia is still capable of retaliating with a nuclear strike. However, if Russia de-evolves into a failed state or de-evolves into a civil war, China can pick a side and then in exchange for military aid and support, maybe they can finally get outer Manchuria back, restore their own historical borders. Ultimately, I don't think that Russia and China are natural allies. I think they're historical rivals. And in Russia's time of need, this is Vladimir Putin right here. Vladimir Putin isn't going to come out of this conflict a winner. And I think that the members of NATO are going to stab him probably 22 times, and it's going to be an E2 Brute moment when China comes up after Russia's fate has been sealed and then stabs them for the 23rd time. Hopefully this video didn't get too dark at the end. We are living in very serious times as multiple nuclear-powered states are getting involved in this armed conflict in Ukraine. Ideally, cooler heads will prevail in the near term. That's what I'm planning for. That's what I'm hoping for. If you guys found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Really helps out with the channel. If you know something I don't, let me know in a comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, take care, be safe.